Hãy đảm bảo mọi
The
thiết bị được
crack
kiểm kê
echoed
đầy đủ.
off concrete
Rõ
walls
thưa sếp,
before
chúng tôi...
anyone understood what had happened. Colonel Voss's hand had moved fast, sharp, practiced like a man who had done this before and expected nothing in return. Lieutenant Nora Halstead didn't fall. She didn't flinch. She simply stood there, one hand rising slowly to her cheek, and looked at him, not with fear, not with anger, with something far more unsettling, patience. Sergeant Call laughed behind a stack of ammunition crates. Sergeant Thorne nodded like he'd just watched something educational. And Sergeant Rydell, the quietest one, looked away fast, like a man who already knew what he was choosing not to see, not... Voss rolled his shoulders back, squared his chest. The way men do when they've just reminded a room who's in charge, that's what I thought, he said.
We move
Nora
forward
said
at
nothing.
0.
Her left hand dropped to her side, and for just 1 second, one single, almost invisible second, her thumb pressed against a small point on her wristband. No one noticed. No one was looking at her hands. They were all watching her face, waiting for the break. The tears, the surrender, it never came. Instead, she looked at Voss with eyes that held no desperation, only a countdown. And somewhere outside, 600 meters away, behind tinted glass and radio silence, 3 generals were already listening. 72 hours before everything changed, Nora Halstead sat alone in a room that smelled like recycled air and bad decisions, Rodham 114, the Fairfield Inn, 16 miles from Fort Alcott. Not the kind of place a full colonel usually stays. But Nora wasn't here as a colonel. Not yet. She sat at the small desk by the window with the curtains pulled in the television off. The only light came from the bathroom, that thin yellow strip under the door that makes every motel room feel like a holding cell at 2 a.m. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't trying to... There was a photograph on the desk in front of her. Not framed, just printed on regular paper. The edges slightly curled from being folded and unfolded too many times. A girl in uniform. Young. 23, maybe 24. Standing in front of a building at Fort Alcott with her chin lifted and her eyes bright and her whole future still arranged in front of her like something that made perfect sense, smiling like she had no idea what was coming. Nora had printed that photo herself 3 months ago from an old email attachment. She'd been printing it and folding it back up ever since. The girl's name was written underneath in blue pen. Nora's own handwriting. Careful. Like she was afraid to forget it. Jenny Harmon, Fort Alcott. 2022, Nora looked at the photo for a long time. Then she opened her briefing folder and got back to work. Jenny Harmon had wanted to be a soldier since she was 11 years old. That was the thing about her. She didn't drift into the military the way some people do. She didn't follow a friend or escape a hometown or chase a paycheck. Jenny had a specific idea in her head about what service meant, what it demanded, what it was supposed to give back. She wrote that in her application letter. Nora remembered reading it the first time and thinking, this one is going to be exceptional. She wasn't wrong. Jenny graduated in the top 8% of her training class. She had a gift for logistics, the kind of quiet, structural thinking that most people don't notice until something goes wrong, and they realize it was one person holding everything together. She was patient, she asked good questions, and she listened to the answers. She was the kind of soldier you build a unit around. She was also 24 years old in a fort commanded by Colonel Raymond Voss, and Raymond Voss had very specific ideas about what kind of soldiers were allowed to be exceptional. Jenny lasted 14 months before she filed her first complaint, not because something catastrophic happened, not one single explosive event. It was smaller than that. Quieter. A series of corrections that didn't need to happen. A series of reprimands in front of other soldiers. A series of moments where the message underneath the official language was always the same. You don't belong here, and I am going to make sure you feel that every single day until you agree. She filed the complaint through proper channels. It disappeared. She filed a second one, also disappeared. She tried to call the Inspector General's office. She was transferred twice, left on hold, called back by someone who told her to be patient, to go through base channels, to give the process time to work. The process didn't work. 6 months later, Jenny Harmon was found in her room on a Tuesday morning. She was 25 years old. Nora had been at a conference in D.C. when she got the call. She remembered exactly where she was standing. Second floor hallway, fluorescent lights, the sound of laughter from a conference room down the hall. The person on the phone said the words, and the hallway kept going. The lights kept humming. The laughter kept happening. The world just kept. Nora stood very still for 90 seconds. Then she walked into the nearest bathroom, locked the stall, sat down, and pressed both hands flat against her thighs. And she thought about the application letter. I believe service means something. I believe it asks something of you that nothing else will. I believe the people who choose it deserve to be treated like that choice mattered. She sat there a long time. When she came out, she washed her hands, fixed her collar, went back to the conference. And that night, she started making phone calls, acutely, carefully, the way she did everything 17 months of calls, 17 months of collecting names and dates and incident reports and transfer records, 17 months of watching a picture assemble itself, one piece at a time, into something so clear that even the people who'd been protecting Voss for years couldn't pretend they didn't see it. 17 complaints filed before Jenny. Not one of them had made it past the base level. When General Constance Mercer called Nora into her office 6 weeks ago and laid the operation on the table, Nora didn't hesitate. She said yes before the general finished the sentence. Mercer looked at her carefully across the desk. This one is personal for you. Yes, ma'am, that's going to make it harder. Not easier, I know. A pause. Are you sure you can hold it? Nora met her eyes. I've been holding it for 17 months. I can hold it a little longer. Fort Alcott sat in a flat stretch of land that felt wider than it actually was, the kind of place where the sky is too big, where the horizon goes on longer than makes sense, and the wind comes from everywhere at once, and there's nowhere to hide from the openness of it. Nora drove through the front gate at 0700 on a Monday morning. Lieutenant's uniform, rank insignia correct, name tape reading Halstad, every detail regulation, and on her left wrist, a simple black nylon wristband, standard issue look, small metal clasp. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. She'd practiced putting it on 40 times before she left the hotel. The gate guard checked her ID, waved her through without looking up. She parked, sat in the car for exactly 30 seconds. Then she got out. She spent the first 3 days watching. That was the part nobody wrote about in mission reports. The watching, the way you had to understand a place before you could let a place understand you. Fort Alcott had a rhythm like every other base. Morning formation, training, the noise of equipment. But underneath that rhythm, something else, a tightness, like the air in a room where someone has been shouting recently, where people talk at normal volume, but their shoulders are always angled toward the nearest exit. She saw it first in the cafeteria. Voss walked in with Call and Thorne on either side of him, just moving through the room like the space belonged to them, and the room believed it. Conversations quieted. Eyes went to trays or phones or somewhere else entirely, all except one. Private First Class Dana Weller sat in the corner by the window, back straight, not looking at Voss, not looking away either, just present in that deliberate, unmovable way that young people only carry when they've learned it the hard way. Nora watched her for a moment, 22 years old, Jenny's closest friend, the person who had filed the 18th complaint 8 months ago and refused to stop pushing when everyone told her to redirect through base channels. Nora looked at her and thought she has no idea how much she changed. Then she picked up her coffee and kept watching. She introduced herself to Voss on day 3, his office, 0900. She knocked on the open door and waited. He was at his desk, looked up, looked her over in approximately 2 seconds, the way some men do, cataloging and concluding simultaneously. Lieutenant Halstead, Colonel Voss, reporting in as directed. He leaned back, arms crossed. The posture of a man who's already decided he's more interested in what someone is than in what they have to say. You're out of Andrews. Yes, sir. Logistics review. Temporary assignment. How long? 60 to 90 days, sir. Depending on what we find, he studied her. We run a tight operation here. I can see that, sir. He nodded slowly. something moving behind his eyes she couldn't name yet. She left his office with her pulse at a perfectly steady 62 beats per minute. She'd trained for this, run this exact interaction in her head hundreds of times, but she hadn't prepared for how ordinary he would seem. That was the thing nobody warned you about. The dangerous ones didn't look dangerous. They looked like men who'd been in the military for 23 years. Competent, experienced, faintly bored by everything that didn't interest them. They looked completely normal until they didn't. The armory was on the east side of the base, concrete block construction, high narrow windows, the smell of metal and oil and organized power, everything purposeful, everything exactly where it's supposed to be. Nora had been scheduled for a routine inventory review. Legitimate reason to be there on a Thursday morning. Voss was already there when she arrived, and so were Call and Thorne. They were always with him, Sergeant Lenny Call, 31 years old, compact, quick to laugh, the kind of man who'd spent his career making himself useful to whoever held rank, not because he was hollow, because he'd figured out early that usefulness was protection, and protection was the whole game. Sergeant Derek Thorne, Broder Queeter until he chose not to be. He waited for the power balance in a room to clarify itself. Then he spoke, always on the winning side, always with the confidence that comes not from being right, but from being aligned with someone who never gets corrected. And against the far wall, Sergeant Marcus Rydell, arms crossed, not participating, not refusing to participate, just there. The way someone stands in a room when they've given up, trying to change the temperature of it, 34 years old, 9 years of service, a record that should have gone somewhere by now and hadn't. Nora had read his file twice. One notation, interpersonal difficulty with command structure, resolved, entered 14 months ago. She knew what that notation actually meant. She knew exactly what it was covering. Nora began the inventory review standard procedure. Clipboard, checklist. Moving through the racks methodically, 12 minutes in, she found the discrepancy. Ammunition inventory, section 4. The logbook said 47 rounds. The rack said 39, 8 rounds unaccounted for. She turned toward Voss. Colonel, the count in section 4 doesn't reconcile. I'm showing 39 against a logged 47. Do you have transfer records for? I'm aware of the section 4 count, Lieutenant. Flat, not defensive. Just flat in the way that closes a conversation before it opens. She kept her voice even. For the review to be complete, I'd need documentation for any unlogged redistribution. Otherwise, it'll flag as I said, I'm aware of it. Call looked up. Thorne shifted slightly. Rydell stayed exactly where he was, but something changed in his posture. The stillness of a person who knows what's coming and has decided there's nothing they can do about it. I understand, sir. When those records are available, I'd appreciate. She didn't finish the sentence. It was fast, the way these things always are. Fast and completely silent in the half second before impact. His hand moving through the air with the ease of something practiced. The crack against the concrete walls before she even fully registered the physics of it. Her head turned with the force. Involuntary. For 1 second, just one. The room was completely still. Then Call laughed. Low. The kind of sound a man makes to show another man he approves. Thorne nodded once, slow and considered, and Rydell looked at the floor. Voss flexed his hand. That's what I thought. Nora didn't fall. She didn't step back. She stood exactly where she'd been standing, her head coming back to center, her left hand rising slowly, deliberately to her cheek. She let herself feel it. The sting. The heat spreading outward, the disorientation of a blow she hadn't fully anticipated, even when part of her knew it was possible. She let herself feel it. Then she let it go. Her thumb pressed lightly against a small point on the nylon wristband. One press. Just half a second. No one saw it. They were all watching her face, waiting for the breakdown. The tears, the scrambling apology, the collapse that would confirm everything Voss had already decided about who she was. Her face gave them nothing. Her eyes found Voss's. She looked at him the way you look at a clock when you're waiting for a specific time to arrive. Not impatient, not afraid. Just counting down. 600 meters from the armory, parked behind the vehicle maintenance building on the west access road, a nondescript military transport van with tinted windows and no unit markings. Inside, anything but ordinary. Brigadier General Constance Mercer sat in the forward position, headphones over one ear, a tablet open in front of her, 61 years old, 34 years of service. The first woman to hold her rank in her branch, a fact she'd never mentioned in conversation because the people who needed to be impressed by it weren't worth impressing. Beside her, Major General Arthur Quill, the kind of general who listened twice as much as he spoke and remembered everything across the console. Major General Theodore Bain, former JAG guy, 30 years of military legal work. A man who had seen the full spectrum of what human beings do to each other inside institutions and had somehow not become cynical. Angry, yes. Cynical, no. All three of them heard the crack when it came through the feeds. The sound of contact, the silence after it. Mercer's jaw tightened. Almost imperceptibly, Quill reached toward the communications board. Not yet, Mercer. Quiet, absolute. Quill pulled his hand back. They sat in the silence of people who have prepared themselves for something and discovered the preparation wasn't quite enough. And they listened, because that was what Nora had asked them to do. Don't come until there's nothing left to deny. Don't come until every word is on record. Don't come until walking away from it is impossible for any of them. Trust me on the timing. Mercer had looked at her across the briefing table. I trust you, but if it escalates past a certain, it won't. You don't know that. No. But I know him, and I know how much rope he'll take if someone offers it, so they waited. And on the audio feed, Voss's voice came through with perfect clarity. That's what I thought. Bain opened his notepad and began to write. Voss had decided to perform. That was the word for it. He'd turned slightly toward Call and Thorne, using them as audience, and started talking with the ease of a man who believed the room was entirely his. You know what the problem is with officers they're sending us these days? Call shook his head. Ready, no real-world experience. They come out of those programs thinking a checklist is the same thing as understanding, that asking the right questions on a form is the same as knowing what you're actually looking at. Thorne nodded vigorously. Nora kept moving along the inventory racks, unhurried, the bruise on her cheek deepening to purple now, visible from across the room, and she moved through her checklist like it wasn't there, like the last 20 minutes hadn't happened, like she was simply working. You hear me, Lieutenant? Yes, sir. She looked at him. And I'd like to complete the review, sir. When you have the transfer documentation for Section 4, I'll reconcile the count. Something shifted in his expression. Like a decision being made. You don't quit, do you? Not a question. She answered it anyway. No, sir. I don't. Call stepped forward then. Taking the cue from Voss's body language, the way water moves into a space when a door opens. She's been like this since she got here. Poking around, acting like this is some kind. Nora said, it's a review, pointed. There's a difference. Is there? 2 words. Flat and precise. Not a question. Just Call opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Voss. Thorne stepped in. What Call means is, you might want to consider how you're coming across. The soldiers in this unit work hard. They don't need someone from Andrews implying, I haven't implied anything. Your attitude implies plenty. Nora turned back to her clipboard. My attitude is completing the review, sir. Colonel Voss, I'll need access to records for sections 4 through 7. If you can direct me to, you know what your problem is? Voss again, closer now. Occupying space the way he always did, claiming proximity as a form of authority, sir. You think those credentials mean something here. The rank. The temporary assignments? He paused. None of that matters in a real unit. What matters is whether you can read a room. She looked at him steadily. I can read a room, sir. Then what do you think is happening in this one? 3 seconds, I think, she said carefully, that the review is going to take a little longer than expected. His jaw tightened, and from the far wall, Riedel made a sound. Almost nothing. The kind of exhale that isn't quite a laugh, but isn't quite not one either. Voss heard it turned. Riedel's face was completely neutral. But something had shifted in the room, some small thing, a millimeter of change in the balance of it, and Voss went looking for where the shift had come from. 14 months ago, Marcus Riedel had done something that cost him almost everything. He'd filed a report, anonymous, through the designated channel on the base intranet. A clear, careful account of 3 specific incidents involving Colonel Voss and junior personnel, names, dates, locations, the kind of documentation that takes hours and requires the quiet, terrifying kind of courage, not the dramatic kind. The kind where you sit alone at a computer at 11 at night and you know exactly what you're doing and you do it anyway. He'd thought anonymous meant protected. He was wrong. 5 days later, Voss assembled the unit, stood in front of him, and read the report aloud, every word, his voice completely calm, his eyes moving slowly across the assembled faces as he read. After he finished, he folded the paper and put it in his pocket. I want whoever wrote this to know something. Quiet. More quiet than anything else that morning. I know everything that happens in my unit, everything. And loyalty to this command is not optional. Then he dismissed them. No one approached Riedel afterward, not to ask if he was okay, not to acknowledge what they'd all just understood, not even to say they agreed, which some of them probably did. The silence was its own message. From that point on, Riedel stopped trying to fix things the official way. He hadn't stopped caring. The caring just had nowhere to go. It sat in his chest like weight, something he was carrying without being able to set down. He'd seen Jenny Harmon 2 weeks before she died, in the hallway outside the records office. She was carrying a file. She looked up and their eyes met. Sergeant Riedel. "Do you think they'll actually listen this time?" He'd said. "I don't know." And he'd walked past. He'd replayed that moment more times than he could count. "I don't know." Not a lie, but not enough truth to do any good. Now he stood against the wall and watched the bruise forming on the cheekbone of a woman who hadn't moved when a colonel hit her, and something that had been shut down for 14 months started very quietly to come back online. Voss had decided to search her bag. It came out of nowhere, or felt that way, but nothing with Voss came out of nowhere. "Security check," he said casually. "Like routine, standard procedure for temporary assignments." "Right." "Sergeant Call?" Call blinked. Half a second. Then, "Absolutely, sir." Nora looked at him. "Sir, that's not standard procedure." Harder. "You have a problem with base security?" "Designed." She knew it. The answer was no. She couldn't object without implying she had something to hide. "No, sir." Call moved toward her. She set her bag on the nearest table, unzipped it herself, stepped back. Call went through it. Standard work materials, documentation, a water bottle. Nothing. He moved to her jacket pockets. Left pocket empty. Inside breast pocket, he stopped, pulled something out, held it up. A military ID card, standard size, standard format, except the name on it wasn't Halstad, and the rank wasn't lieutenant. The room went quiet. Call turned the card over. Reading it again, he looked at Voss. Voss looked at the card, then looked at Nora. She was already looking at him, not alarmed, not scrambling, not doing any of the things a person does when they've been caught, just waiting. Patient as stone. I want to explain this. Low. Controlled. But underneath it, sharp. "Old ID," Nora said, "from a TDY assignment last year. I meant to return it to records before I left Andrews. I forgot." Silence. Voss held the card. The unit listed was unusual. The rank designator had a suffix that didn't match standard logistics assignments. If you knew what to look for, it raised questions. He knew enough to know it raised questions, but not quite enough to know what the questions were. 6 seconds that felt considerably longer. In the van 600 meters away, Mercer had risen from her seat, not dramatically, just upright, alert, her hand on the communications board. Quill put a hand on her arm, not restraining, just wait. She waited. Voss turned the card over one more time and then threw it back on the table. "Get it returned when you're done with the review," and moved on. In the van, Mercer sat back down, slowly. She looked at Quill. He looked at her. Bain said quietly, "She told us she could hold it. She held it." Quill confirmed. Mercer picked up her headset, went back to listening. Lenny Call had a memory he didn't talk about 9 years ago. Different base, different state. He was 22 and new to the unit and eager in the specific way young soldiers are eager, not for glory, but for belonging, for being recognized as useful, for earning a place in something larger than anything he'd been part of before. His unit sergeant at the time was a man named Hark. Hark was good at his job, precise, effective. No one in that unit would say otherwise. He was also a man who needed people to be smaller than him in order to feel the right size. Call understood this the first time Hark corrected him loudly in front of the unit for an error that could have been handled in 30 seconds of private conversations. He understood it and he adapted. He learned to read Hark's moods, to anticipate corrections, to position himself as someone useful rather than threatening, to become over time the person standing at Hark's shoulder instead of in front of him. It worked. He survived. He told himself that was the point. Now he stood in a concrete armory watching a woman with a bruise on her face calmly document an inventory. And he thought about Hark for the first time in years. He thought about the feeling of being 22 years old and understanding clearly and completely that something wrong was happening and doing nothing, because doing nothing was the thing that kept you safe. He'd spent 9 years building a career on top of that moment. He'd never asked himself what was buried underneath it. He was starting to ask now, not quickly enough, but starting. Thorne had decided the ID incident was a victory. He needed the events around him to add up to a story where his side was winning. And Voss finding something, examining it, dismissing it, he filed that as, we checked her. She came up with nothing. Now she looks like she was hiding something and failed. So he leaned in. These temporary assignments, he said. You never know who you're actually getting. What their real agenda is, Nora made a small note on her clipboard. Real agenda, she said. That's right. What do you think my agenda is, Sergeant? He paused. Deciding which version to deliver. You came in here looking to make a name for yourself on someone else's record. Find a discrepancy. Make it sound bigger than it is. Get credit for an investigation that inconveniences a unit that was running fine before you showed up. She looked at him. Was it running fine? Yes, the 8-round discrepancy in Section 4. His jaw tightened. Documentation issue. Documented by whom? By Colonel Voss. When? Thorne stopped, recalibrated. He indicated it was under control, indicated how. Lieutenant Voss's voice. Warning, she looked at Voss, sir. For the review to have an accurate record, can you specify when the Section 4 discrepancy was identified and what corrective action was initiated? The room went tight. Not because the question was unreasonable. It was completely reasonable. It was exactly what a legitimate reviewer was required to ask. It was tight because Voss's eyes had gone flat. We'll address the documentation, he said. Later, of course, sir. And she went back to her clipboard. It was Thorne who started talking about lessons. He didn't frame it as a lesson. He framed it as an example. The kind of anecdote men like Thorne deployed when they wanted to make a point without taking direct responsibility for it. Had a lieutenant in my last unit, he said, conversationally. Young, smart on paper. The kind who thought book learning translated directly to field experience. A pause. The colonel there had to correct that lieutenant twice in the first month. After the second time, the lieutenant adjusted. Actually turned into a decent soldier by the time the posting ended. He looked at Nora's back. Some people need more than one correction to understand how things work. That's not a character flaw. It's just a learning curve. The room waited. Nora didn't respond, didn't turn around. She reached the end of a rack, made a notation, moved to the next one. You hear me, Lieutenant. I hear you, Sergeant. And she turned. Looked at him. I think that's a very tidy story for what it's describing. His eyes narrowed. Meaning, corrections have definitions. Within the military code, there's specific language for what constitutes lawful correction of a subordinate, a pause. What happened in this room this morning isn't inside that language. Silence. Voss looked at her. You want to be careful, he said quietly. I'm always careful, sir, she said. That's why I'm here. Rydell had been counting the helicopters, not consciously. It was habit, the kind of thing military training builds into you until it happens without decision. Situational awareness. Inventory of the environment. 3. He'd identified 3 distinct rotor signatures before they settled: military, weight, and speed. Not transport, not supply command configuration. He knew that configuration. He'd been present once, years ago, just different base, when a command configuration landed for an unannounced investigation. He remembered the sound of it, the particular quality of purpose in it, the way the base went quiet when people realized what kind of helicopters were sitting on their flight line. He remembered thinking, someone called them here. He looked at Nora, far end of the armory now, just working her way through the last section of racks. Back to the room, left hand holding the clipboard, left wrist. He looked at the wristband standard issue look. Black nylon, small metal clasps, except he'd been in logistics long enough to recognize standard issue when he saw it. And that clasp wasn't standard. Slightly different weight, slightly different profile. Just the kind of difference you'd only notice if you were looking for it. He thought recording device. He thought those helicopters are not a coincidence. He thought, oh, and then how long has it been running? And then very quietly, just in the back of his mind, Jenny, he crossed the room 3 steps, quiet. Thorne was talking. Call was nodding. The background noise of men who believe they're narrating events they control. Riedel moved in the gap close enough. Just low enough. I should have done something, he said. Back then, a long time before now, he stopped. I'm sorry. He waited. Nora didn't turn around, didn't react in any visible way. But after one beat, one precise, just deliberate beat, she nodded, just slightly. Just enough. Riedel stepped back to his wall and stood differently than he'd been standing before. Voss had been talking for a long time now, ranging, circling, the kind of monologue that feeds itself, each sentence generating enough satisfaction to power the next. The importance of discipline, the failure of modern standards, the particular arrogance of officers who confused credentials with capability. He was good at this. That was the unsettling part. He wasn't raving. He was measured, articulate. He made his points with the ease of a man who'd never been seriously contradicted, which was, of course, exactly the problem. Then he said, here's what's going to happen next. He stepped closer to Nora. You're going to complete this inventory, every section, every rack, by hand. Today, I'll pause for effect. Then you're going to write a formal account of your conduct since arriving, including your disrespectful questioning and your unprofessional response to appropriate corrections. Thorne was already composing his face into the expression of a man watching justice administered. And when you've done both, Voss continued, you're going to stand in front of this unit at morning formation and acknowledge that your assignment here began with a failure to observe proper military courtesy. Silence. Nora looked at him. I want you to understand something, Colonel, something in her voice, small but irreversible, like a hinge turning. Everything that happens from this point forward was completely preventable. Voss stared at her. Before he could respond, her phone buzzed in her breast pocket. She didn't move. It buzzed again. Going to get that? He said, expansive. Mocking. It can wait, sir. Go ahead. Don't let us interrupt. It kept buzzing. Steady, patient, like it had all the time in the world, which in a sense it did the 7th buzz. The 8th, how many times is that going to ring? I'm not sure, sir. Pick it up. She reached into her pocket, looked at the screen, 17 missed calls. All from the same number. Her thumb hovered over the answer button. She looked up at Voss first, just for a moment. The way you look at something you're about to leave behind. Then she answered, yes, sir. And in the 3 seconds that followed, while the voice on the other end began to speak, something happened to Nora Halstead. Not dramatic, no sudden gesture, no visible shift that anyone could point to and describe precisely afterward. It was more like watching a door open in someone's face, like watching a person step into the version of themselves they'd been holding back. Her spine straightened, her free hand dropped to her side. Her eyes went absolutely still, not cold, not hard, just certain. Call saw it first. Didn't know what he was looking at, but something in the back of his chest registered it as a problem. Thorne stopped talking mid-sentence. Riedel looked up from the floor. For understood, sir, Nora said into the phone, her voice completely calm. 3 minutes, sir. She ended the call, slipped the phone back into her pocket. Colonel, one word, just his title. But the weight behind it was different from anything she'd said before. You have approximately 90 seconds to prepare yourselves. Voss stared at her. Prepare for what? Outside, in the corridors beyond the armory's thick walls. Something had changed. The idle of rotors that had been running in the background for nearly an hour went silent. Complete silence where there had been constant, low mechanical sound. And in the space that silence left behind, footsteps, many of them, organized, deliberate, moving toward this specific door with the rhythm of people who know exactly where they're going. Voss heard it. His head turned toward the door. And for the first time in this entire encounter, something appeared in his expression that wasn't confidence, small, barely visible, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't watching for it. But Nora had been watching for it for nearly an hour, and there it was. The sound of metal against metal, a lock mechanism disengaging from the outside with practiced efficiency. Voss looked at Nora. She looked back, and she let him see, for the first time, exactly what her expression had been holding back this entire time. Not anger, not triumph, something quieter than both. The specific look of a person who has been waiting a very long time and has just arrived. The lock clicked. The door began to open. The light from outside came first. Late morning light on a military base. Flat and honest and unsparing. No shadows to hide in. No softness. Just clarity. The kind that shows everything exactly as it is. And then the figures in the doorway, 3 of them, stepping through in precise formation. Uniforms pressed to a standard that made the armory's occupants look, by contrast, like they'd been assembled in a hurry. The lead figure was a woman, Brigadier General Constance Mercer, 61 years old. 5'6", iron gray hair. The kind of posture that doesn't come from training but from 34 years of deciding things that mattered. She stepped into the armory like she owned it because for all legal and operational purposes, as of approximately 40 seconds ago, she did. She looked across the room, past Voss, past Call, past Thorne, past Rydell, who was already straightening, already repositioning, already understanding, to Nora, standing exactly where she'd been standing, bruise on her cheek, clipboard in her hand, and in her eyes, the expression of someone who has just finished doing something very difficult and done it right. Colonel Halstead, Mercer's voice filled the room completely. Are you injured and do you require immediate medical attention before we proceed? The room went still, not quiet, still. The difference between a sound turning off and something much larger than sound stopping entirely. Voss heard the word colonel, and behind his eyes, something went out. Like a switch, what replaced it, slowly dawning much too late, was understanding. His mouth opened. No sound came out, which was, under the circumstances, the most appropriate thing it had done all morning. Colonel Raymond Voss, Mercer's voice, specific, formal, every word selected because it would appear in documents reviewed by people in rooms, far more powerful than this one. Voss turned to face her. He tried to reassemble himself. You could see it happening. Shoulders going back, chin lifting. See, 23 years of military bearing attempting to reestablish itself over the ruins of the last minute. It didn't quite work. But he tried, sir, he said. I wasn't. You will have the opportunity to speak, Mercer said. You will wait for that opportunity. He waited. You are hereby relieved of all command authority pending formal investigation under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Your access to personnel, facilities, and records at Fort Alcott is suspended effective immediately. You will surrender your credentials to Sergeant Major Decker. Voss turned. A senior sergeant stood directly behind him. He hadn't heard the man come in. That was the thing about command configurations. When they wanted to be quiet, they were quiet. Voss unclipped his credentials, handed them over. His hands were steady. Give him that. His hands were steady behind him. Military police had begun filing in with the quiet efficiency of people who have rehearsed this moment and are now simply executing it, positioning along the walls, around the exits. Not aggressive, just present, immovable. The armory, which had felt vast and empty 90 minutes ago, was becoming very small, very fast. Major General Quill stepped forward, carrying a folder, thick, properly labeled, months of work inside it, analysts, investigators, legal officers, victim advocates, record specialists, all of it for this room, all of it for this moment. He opened it with the care of a man who understands that what he holds is not just paper, it's years, it's lives. It's the distance between what happened and what should have happened, and all the space in between that someone has to account for. Eventually, Sergeant Lenny Call went rigid. Sergeant Derek Thorne's composure disintegrated fast. Like a building whose foundation has been removed, everything holding its shape until the moment it simply doesn't. Sergeant Marcus Radel looked up. He didn't go rigid. He didn't disintegrate. He just looked steady. The look of a man who has already had the worst conversation with himself and arrived at the other side. You are each individually named in this investigation as participants in and witnesses to conduct constituting violations under Articles 81, 93, and 128 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You will each be advised of your rights under Article 31 before any formal statement is taken. Legal counsel has been notified and is en route. Thorne's voice broke open. Sir, I, Sergeant Thorne. Quill. Flat, not loud. You will wait. Thorne waited. Voss tried one more time. He turned to Mercer. And his voice, when it came out, had lost almost everything that had made it dangerous. What was left was just a man, 60 years old, 23 years of service, standing in a concrete room with everything he'd built in the process of being dismantled around him. Sir, given my record, my years, there has to be a way to handle this administratively without Colonel Voss. Mercer's voice was not unkind. That was the surprising part. Not unkind, just immovable. Your record is currently under comprehensive review by the Inspector General's office. What that review has found suggests that what happened in this room today is not an isolated incident. It is the most recent in a documented pattern, a silence. Administrative handling is not available when criminal conduct has been witnessed, recorded, and corroborated by senior officers. The recording, Voss said slowly, not a question, a realization. He looked at Nora, at the wristband specifically, and understood exactly what it was and exactly how long it had been running. Bain stepped forward with a second folder, seals on the cover indicating authority well above installation level, above base commander, above regional command, all the way up. I want to address the question of how 17 complaints over 14 months failed to generate a formal response, he said. We said his voice was the quietest of the three generals, but it carried the furthest. This investigation was initiated following Private First Class Dana Weller's formal complaint, the 18th complaint filed, and the first to reach a review board outside this installation. Her persistence, despite being redirected twice through base channels, created the paper trail that made this operation possible. He paused. The previous 17 complaints did not fail because the system didn't work. They failed because someone inside this installation deliberately ensured they didn't reach the people who needed to see them. Call looked up, Thorne looked up, even Voss looked up, MSGT. Wendell Cross, Bain said, step forward. A man near the door, he'd been there since the generals came in, against the left wall, the peripheral position of someone who has spent years learning to make themselves unremarkable in crowds' 50s. Heavyset, the kind of face that suggested a man who used to smile easily and had gradually run out of reasons. He stepped forward, one step, slow, like the floor might not hold him. 17 complaints passed through your office over 14 months. None were forwarded to the review board. None were documented in the central complaint registry. Bain looked at him steadily. An investigation into your conduct will determine the appropriate course of action. Cross said nothing. He nodded. Once, barely the nod of a man who has known this moment was coming for a long time, and finds in its arrival something complicated that isn't quite relief, but is adjacent to it. Nora crossed the room toward him. Not for the generals. Just for him, he had something on you, she said quietly. Cross looked at her. A financial incident, she continued. 7 years ago, his jaw tightened. It wasn't criminal. It was a paperwork mistake. But if it had come out, my retirement, my family, he stopped. Voss found it. He never threatened me directly. He just made sure I understood what he knew. And then whenever something came through the complaint channel involving him, you made it disappear, she said. Yes, just yes. The sound of a person who is done carrying something alone. You weren't protecting him, she said. You were protecting yourself. Both. I told myself it was different. For a long time, I told myself that. A long pause. And then Jenny Harmon died. His face changed completely. And then Jenny Harmon died. He confirmed, barely above a whisper, I should have. Yes, Nora said. You should have. Not cruel. Just true. The difference mattered. To both of them. Rydell was standing near the door, not under guard. His situation specifically distinct from the other three, a fact Bain had noted. And the military police were honoring with the precision complex situations require. Quill approached him quickly. The way you speak to someone when you want them to hear you specifically, not the institution behind you, Sergeant Rydell. The anonymous complaint filed 14 months ago. We have it. We've had it for 6 weeks. We know what happened to it, and we know why it never reached us. Rydell said nothing. You're being asked to testify voluntarily. A complete account, today and prior. Your cooperation will be documented and considered in determining how your situation is handled. Rydell looked across the room at Voss. Being formally processed, credentials gone, command gone. He thought about a hallway outside the records office. A young woman with a file under her arm, Sergeant Rydell. Do you think they'll actually listen this time? I don't know. He'd said that and walked away. He stood there for a long moment, long enough that Quill didn't rush him, long enough that the silence had weight. Then, I'll testify, Quill waited. Everything, Rydell said, from the beginning, including the parts where I didn't do enough. That's part of the record, too. Quill looked at him for a moment. That took courage, Sergeant. Rydell shook his head. No, sir. Quiet. Clear. Courage was 14 months ago, and I missed it. This is just being late. Quill wrote something in his notebook, moved on. Dana Weller came through the door 20 minutes later. She'd been on the east yard. One of Mercer's staff had found her and asked her to come quietly. Without saying why, she walked in not knowing what she was about to see. And stopped generals. Military police. Serious people doing serious things with serious folders. And Nora, standing near the inventory racks, bruise on her cheek. Not a lieutenant anymore. The rank on her collar had changed. The eagles of a full colonel where the lieutenant bars had been. Donna looked at her, and something crossed her face that was almost too much to watch. Too many things at once. Recognition. Disbelief. The beginning of something that had been locked up for 20 months and was only now finding the door. Private Weller Mercer said Dana straightened automatically. At ease, Mercer's voice softened. Not unprofessionally. Humanly. The adjustment that some generals are capable of and others are not. You're not here to be questioned or processed. You're here because you're owed an explanation. Donna waited. Your complaint 8 months ago, the one you were told twice to redirect through base channels, was not discarded. It was the complaint that first reached outside this installation. Everything that happened in this room today can be traced to the fact that you didn't stop. Dana's throat moved. 18 complaints, she said. Yours was the 18th, and the other 17 were deliberately suppressed. Yes, that's being addressed. Dana looked at the floor for a long moment, then looked back up. Jenny filed too, she said. Her voice steady despite everything. We know. Both have been recovered from the archive where they were buried. They're part of the formal record now. They will be part of everything that follows. Dana's eyes filled. She didn't look away, didn't reach up to stop it. She just stood there and let it happen. Just the specific kind of tears that aren't performance, just the first moment in a very long time when enough has shifted to let something through. Mercer let her have it, didn't rush, didn't redirect, just waited, completely still. For Dana. Nora crossed the room, stopped in front of Dana. Dana looked up at her. I wrote the letter, Nora said. The one that got Jenny into the program. 3 years ago, a pause, I told them she was exceptional. That she had a kind of intelligence you couldn't teach. That the military needed people like her more than they'd probably understand. Dana's breath caught. She talked about you, Dana said. She said you were the only person who read her application like she actually meant it. She did mean it. She meant all of it. A silence between them. The kind that holds too much to be uncomfortable with. I didn't get here in time, Nora said straight. No softening and no excusing. I want you to know that I know that what happened in this room today doesn't fix it. It doesn't bring her back. A pause, but it is something. And she is why. Dana looked at her for a long time. She would have done this herself, Dana said, finally. If she'd lived, she would have figured out a way to do exactly this. She was like that, I know, Nora said. She would have been better at it than either of us. Nora almost smiled. Probably, she said. And they stood together in the middle of a concrete room that smelled like metal and morning and the specific aftermath of something that had taken a very long time to arrive. The formal arrests were made. Voss, call. Thorne not loud, not dramatic. The military police moved with the quiet efficiency of people who understand that anything done improperly here becomes a defense attorney's opening argument. Everything was done properly. Voss went through the door without looking back. Call passed Nora on his way out. He looked at her, something in his face trying to be defiance and arriving somewhere more honest. Somewhere at the edges of shame, not absolution, not even close, but something real that hadn't been there 90 minutes ago. He looked away first and walked out. Thorne stared straight ahead at the corridor wall the entire way. Didn't look at anyone, just walked. Outside, official vehicles were already waiting. The base personnel who had gathered along the corridor stood in silence as the three men were led through. No jeering, no satisfaction on most faces. Just the stunned quiet of people processing what happens when something they'd learned to accept as permanent suddenly isn't. Nora stood alone in the armory. Everyone had filtered out. The logistics of aftermath moving through the building's corridors, statements, transportation, documentation, at the steady pace of institutional process, doing what it eventually does when someone makes it. She was alone in the space where it all happened. The walls hadn't changed, still concrete. Still the gray beige of military construction designed for function and nothing else. The overhead lights still hummed. The inventory racks still stood in rows. The Section 4 discrepancy still waiting patiently for its paperwork. She would file the review properly. Later, when the legal proceedings reached the right stage, she'd complete every section, reconcile every count, because that was what she'd come here to do. And the fact that something else had also happened didn't change the work. That was another thing about Nora Halstead that people underestimated. She finished things. She looked at the table where Call had thrown her secondary ID. She looked at the spot on the floor where she'd been standing when Voss's hand came across her face. She looked at the wall she'd faced when Rydell whispered an apology that had been waiting 14 months to find the right moment. Then she reached up and removed the lieutenant's insignia from her collar, small pieces of metal. Light in her hand, the specific weight of something that represents something much heavier. She set them on the table and pinned her actual rank back into place, the eagles of a full colonel, the rank she'd held for 4 years, set aside for this, representing 2 decades of decisions, good ones and wrong ones and agonizing ones that had added up to a person who could stand in a room for nearly an hour and take whatever came, not break. She straightened her collar, checked herself in the small supply room mirror on the wall. The bruise was significant, dark and already spreading. Going to be worse tomorrow before it was better. She looked at it for a moment. Evidence, she told Mercer. And it would, in the photographs, in the files, in the formal record that would follow Voss through every stage of what was coming. She looked at it one more time. Then she picked up her clipboard and walked out of the armory into the late morning light. Donna was on the walkway, not waiting, or not obviously waiting, just standing, looking out at the base yard where Fort Alcott's daily operations were slowly, improbably, resuming their ordinary shape. Nora stopped beside her. They stood together without speaking for a moment. She wanted to be stationed here, Dana said finally. She asked for it specifically. Said it felt like a place where you could actually make a difference instead of getting lost in the machine. Nora listened. She had a 5-year plan. I used to tease her about it. Who has a 5-year plan at 24? The exceptional ones, Nora said quietly. Donna breathed out. She would have made your life so complicated in there. She would have had 12 contingency plans and argued with you about every single one. Good, Nora said. You would have loved her. I already did, Nora said. From a recommendation letter and one conversation at a conference. That was all I needed. Dana looked at her. Is that why you took this? A pause. Partly, Nora said. And partly because someone had to. She looked out at the yard. And partly because the version of me that didn't take it wasn't a version I could stand to be. Dana nodded. Slowly. Taking time with it. What happens now? She asked. Nora looked at the yard, at the soldiers moving through it, young and purposeful and carrying all of them, whatever it was they'd arrived here carrying. Now the work starts, Nora said. The real kind. The kind without a recording device and a command van. The kind that's just showing up every day in rooms where something's wrong. And saying so, a pause, it's slower, less dramatic. Most of the time, nobody's watching, but it matters. Dana said, it matters most when nobody's watching, Nora said. That's when it actually counts. Dana was quiet for a moment, then she laughed small, brief. The specific laugh of a young woman who has been carrying grief for 20 months and has just found, in the middle of everything, one small true thing to set beside it. Jenny would have had a lot to say about that. Tell me sometime, Nora said. Donna looked at her. Yeah. The yard went on ahead of them, ordinary and necessary and full of work still to do. Nora picked up her step and walked into it.